What is up guys, Morton here from SteamFirst.com with a review for the old school action-adventure game Litil Divil, originally released in 1993 and re-released on Steam on March 19th, 2014 for $10. As I mentioned, Litil Divil was originally released back in 1993 for the Amiga CD32 and DOS, so does it age well is the real question. And for the most part, yes it does. There are some things I have pretty big issues with, but at the same time the core gameplay itself is pretty fun. Litil Divil is an action-adventure game, but I'd also say it's a puzzle game as well. Basically the game is pretty simple. You control the main character, Mutt, and you have to travel through the Labyrinth of Chaos to get a pizza. Yeah, more on that later. But basically, to get through the labyrinth, you need to visit a bunch of rooms, find certain items, and use them in other rooms. So for example, if you need to put out a fire, you need a bucket of water. In order to get a bucket of water, you need a bucket, and to get the bucket, you need money to buy it, so you need to first track down the money, and then go from there, and yeah. Basically, that's the whole game. It leads to a lot of backtracking, because you need to keep going forward until you get to a point where you need something you missed a while back. The way the labyrinth is set up works nicely. There's a series of hallways with twists and turns, and then doors you can open to go into various rooms. The rooms either have something useful in them that you'll probably need later, or you need to use something you previously got to get something new. As for things I dislike, the game runs on an emulator called DOSBox, and it crashes every time you tab out. So when you tab out, which I did a lot so I could keep looking up the completely unintuitive controls, it crashes and you go back to the beginning. The game crashing would be manageable, but this leads to the main thing I had an issue with gameplay-wise. You can only save the game in certain rooms. I suppose you could say it'd be too easy if you could save anywhere and just keep retrying things if it goes wrong, but at the same time it's really terrible not being able to save. And it can take quite a long time to get to a save room. They're pretty far spread out, and if you run out of health you'll be captured and have to restart from a save or from the beginning. Losing health happens slowly over time, and then if you hit any of the traps you'll lose a portion as well. There's holes in the ground, spikes in the ground, flamethrowers on the wall, just to name a few, and if you walk into any of those things you'll take some damage. It isn't much at once, but after you fall into 5 holes it starts to add up. To get your health back, you have to pick up food you find scattered around. For the most part there's enough, but sometimes you get very lost, it is a labyrinth after all, and can go quite a while without finding anything to regain health. And then if you couldn't find a save room either, you get to try all over again after you get captured. It's actually very annoying because you feel like you're just wasting time if you're unable to find a save room fast enough. I'd say you can probably beat the game in about 2 or 3 hours if you know what you're doing, but if you don't, it could easily take much longer since you'll have to keep redoing and retrying things. Gameplay gets a 3.5 out of 5. It's really fun when you're actually making progress and exploring new areas. Everything works solid, and once you figure out the controls it's not that bad, but you spend so much time walking in circles because there's no indicator of where or what you're supposed to do, that if you get lost once, you're gonna be in for a bad time. Graphically, the game looks like an early 90s game. The style is actually pretty good. I think it aged quite well, but if you're looking for something super fancy, obviously you're going to be disappointed. There's a pretty good variety in rooms throughout the game, and although things aren't really super detailed or anything, it still holds up well. There can be times when it takes a lot of effort to figure out what a certain item is. For example, a bottle with a skull and crossbones is obviously some kind of poison, but what type of poison is basically left for you to guess. This is never really a problem though, and it's really my only complaint. Graphics get a 4 out of 5. They're pretty good given the time the game was created. And just like the visuals, the audio is good too. The soundtrack is actually really good, and most of the sound effects are good. Some of them are pretty odd, but it's really not that noticeable. Overall, much like the graphics, the sounds are good, and about what you'd expect from a game made in 1993. Sound gets a 4 out of 5, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It adds something to the game without being annoying. The story is pretty pointless. Your task is to go get a pizza, and for some reason it requires you to go through this entire labyrinth. I don't really know why. It was pretty much not at all necessary, and they easily could have just not had a story at all. In fact, when you start the game, you just start playing. There's nothing telling you what to do or why you're doing it. If you were to just turn the game on and start, you'd have no idea what the story is unless you read about it on the Steam page. Story gets a 1 out of 5, mainly because it's completely uninteresting, completely pointless, and obviously only exists as a reason to get you to go through the labyrinth, and it's not even a particularly good reason. They could have had you looking for some powerful gem or something, not a pizza, and the fact that nobody even talks about the story in-game makes it seem all the more pointless. As for reasons to play Litil Divil a second time, I can't really think of any. There are no achievements or leaderboards to try to get on, and once you know where to go and what to do, there's no challenge left. So unless you really like the story of going to get a pizza, there's no reason to play this a second time. Overall, Litil Divil gets a 3 out of 5. It's not that bad, but it's not amazing either. It's a good dose of nostalgia though for people that played the game previously, or for people who just like games from the early 90s. If you're a fan of retro games but haven't played this one, then it's definitely worth checking out. It has a lot of flaws that other games in the 90s had, but it's also pretty fun to play once you get used to it. but if you're not really into retro games, then you'll probably just be aggravated more often than not.